On July 30th of 2008, Timothy McLean boarded Greyhound bus 1170 at approximately 12:01 a.m. Tim, a 22-year-old carnival barker, was returning home to Winnipeg after wrapping up a fair job in Edmonton. Tim would take to the back of the bus, one row ahead of the facilities. During his journey home, at approximately 6:55 p.m., the bus would depart from a stop in Erickson, Manitoba. It was at this point that the bus would be boarded with new passengers. Specifically, we will be taking a look at one passenger in particular. You may have never heard of Will Baker, but perhaps you may have heard of him through a different name. Does Vincent Lee ring any bells? It's perfectly fine if you've never heard of him. This case is 12 years old after all, and as of the current moment, I had never heard this name either. Let's provide some depth to Mr. Lee, or as he's legally known today, Will Baker. Vincent Lee was born on April 20th, 1968 in Dandong, China. It's been noted that as a child, Lee was sick and fragile, often in his early childhood. In 1992, Vincent graduated from the Wuhan Institute of Technology, earning his bachelor's degree in computing, and married his wife Anna in China in 1995. Lee would work in Beijing as a computer software engineer from 1994 to 1998, and in 2001, Vincent Lee immigrated to Canada and received citizenship on November 7, 2006. During his time in Canada, he would work menial jobs in Winnipeg, Thompson, and Edmonton. These jobs would range in variety such as a Walmart store clerk, a fast food delivery worker, and a newspaper delivery driver. Pastor Tom Castor described Lee as someone happy to have a job and was committed to doing well, despite an obvious language barrier. His former delivery employer would back this up by saying that Lee was reliable, hardworking, and never showed any signs of doubt and/or trouble. For the most part, there isn't much to Vincent outside of what most would consider normal. That is, up until the summer of 2004, when his wife Anna would recount a time when Vincent would start to act strangely. This would start out with behavior changes such as not regularly sleeping or eating. Anna recalled Vincent crying and saying things like, "I have seen God." Assuming that he was having a psychiatric fit due to the lack of sleep or maintaining a proper diet, Anna would purchase and give Lee sleeping pills. These symptoms would roughly subside in 7 days. In 2005, Vincent made one psychiatric admission when he was picked up by the police on the highway to Winnipeg from Ontario and was admitted to the William Osler Health Center in Etobicoke. He was allowed discharge against the advice of medical staff. Lee would not seek further psychiatric assistance. I'd like to note here, in his early childhood, there had never been any accounts of mental health discrepancies. Lee had a maternal uncle who had an unspecified mental illness, but no other records of family mental health history exists at all. In 2005, Vincent would return to China to obtain divorce from Anna. However, he would maintain a marital relationship with her. Now let's go back to July 2008. On July 28, 2008, at 12:05 p.m., Lee boarded a bus toward Winnipeg. On July 29, 2008, around 6 p.m., Lee got off the bus in Erickson, Manitoba with a few pieces of luggage in tow. Lee would spend the night on a bench near a local grocery store. Eyewitness accounts state that Lee was spotted sitting rigid and upright with his eyes wide open at 3 a.m. On the morning of the 30th, Lee apparently sold a brand new laptop to a 15-year-old boy for $60. This would later be retrieved as evidence, and the boy would have his laptop replaced. As mentioned, Vincent Lee would board bus 1170 at 6:55 p.m. on July 30th, 2008. Originally, Lee would take a seat near the front of the bus, but after a scheduled rest stop, Lee would reseat himself with Tim McLean. Upon this relocation, Tim would take note of Lee's arrival before resting his head against the window with his headphones on and drifting off to sleep. What happens next is disturbing. You have been warned. According to reports, at 8:30 p.m., the RCMP in Manitoba received a report of a stabbing on a Greyhound bus just outside of the city. Arriving at the scene, officers would discover passengers huddled by the roadside, some of which were vomiting and crying. The suspect was still on the bus, being held captive by the bus driver and a truck driver who provided a crowbar and a hammer as a means of defense. The suspect would attempt to hijack the bus and flee the scene. However, the bus driver would engage the immobilizer, rendering the bus incapable of being used as a means of escape. Passengers would inform the RCMP that they had witnessed the suspect repeatedly stabbing and cutting the victim, going as far as cutting off his head. By 9 p.m., the officers were officially in a standoff with the suspect. Drastic measures would be taken as officers would call for a special negotiation team and an armored tactical unit. The suspect would taunt officers by pacing the entire bus and cutting and defiling the body. Officers would then witness the suspect consuming parts of the body. The suspect would repeat multiple times that they just needed to remain on board the bus forever. This would go on for hours and hours. On the morning of July 31st, 2008 at 1:30 a.m., the suspect would attempt to escape the bus by breaking through a window. The escape was a failure, and the suspect would be apprehended. The nightmare that Vincent Lee had unleashed would end with him being tased twice and hauled off to a police cruiser. Upon being taken into custody, officers would discover Tim McLean's ear, nose, and tongue in the pockets of Vincent Lee. McLean's remains would have to be recovered in plastic bags. However, his eyes and part of his heart had never been recovered and were presumed to have been eaten by Vincent Lee. Witness accounts would go on to state that they had heard screaming while on the bus and turned to discover Lee standing over top of McLean and stabbing him repeatedly with a large knife in the neck. Another would state that Lee would present the head to them very calmly before dropping it to the floor. He would go on to state that Lee seemed oblivious to the others around him and that Lee was very calm and robotic in his actions. Following the attack, Greyhound Canada had announced that they would be changing their series of nationwide ads that read, "There's a reason you've never heard of bus rage." PETA would get involved in an attempt to advertise, comparing the death of Tim McLean to the killing of animals for food. This would lead to backlash against PETA for attempting to exploit the incident. However, PETA would refuse to apologize for their actions. In March of 2009, Vincent Lee would go to trial pleading that he was not criminally responsible for his crime. This would essentially mean that Lee was admitting to the crime, but also stating that he was not capable of manifesting the actions on his own. Vincent Lee claimed that he heard the voice of God telling him to commit the act. He would state that the voice told him to kill McLean because he was a force of evil that was about to execute him. In a panic and out of fear for his own life, he listened to the voice and murdered the young man. Lee believed that the 22-year-old man was still capable of coming back from the dead, which prompted him to mutilate the body and scatter the remains around the bus. Lee's psychiatric doctor would diagnose Vincent with schizophrenia. The presiding judge would accept this diagnosis and would rule that Vincent Lee was not criminally responsible for the crime. Lee would be remanded to the Selkirk Mental Health Center in Canada. In 2010, Lee would be granted supervised outdoor walks within the mental health facility. In 2014, first responding officer Ken Barker would take his own life due to suffering from PTSD. In 2015, Lee was reported being awarded unsupervised day passes to visit Winnipeg with the stipulation that he would be expected to carry a functioning cell phone. In 2016, Vincent Lee would legally change his name to Will Baker and sought leaving his group home and was awarded the right to live alone. In 2017, the Manitoba Criminal Code Review Board would order that Vincent Lee be granted absolute discharge. This meant that he would be able to continue to live out the rest of his days unsupervised and without any legal obligation to answer to anyone. Vincent Lee would become a free man. And so I leave the rest to you. What are your thoughts? This crime is truly graphic and horrific. The details are nothing short of a nightmarish hell that no one should ever have to bear witness to. On the one hand, we have a man suffering from a mental illness that is completely beyond his capability to control. On the other, we have a young man murdered without any justified reason. In the end, the man responsible, regardless of whether or not he was the driver, now walks free with absolutely no supervision and no legal responsibility to check in with anyone to ensure that this never happens again. Let me know down in the comments below. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed the narration. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.